So, if you've seen my last two build videos, you know I'm building a party around darkness, specifically the darkness spell. We've got someone to drop that darkness, and we've got someone to help our party see through it. Now we need someone to keep enemies in the darkness. Hello team players. Today's build is a champion. Let's dive in. The main thing we want to do in this build is keep enemies in our darkness, which means strength is going to be our most important attributes, as well as constitution, as we need to be able to take hits. Granted, we are a champion, so we're going to have a lot of AC, but it's always nice to have extra HP on top of that. In addition, we also need charisma, as we want to be good at intimidation in this build. This entire party is about frightening enemies in darkness, so we're going to need at least decent charisma here. For skills, as I just said, intimidation is very important for this build. And, of course, with decent charisma, we can be the face of the party if we want to be. So things like deception and diplomacy may be useful here. We won't be putting any points into athletics, because we'll be using a shield for this build. And really, we don't need anything else. I mean, you can take what you want, but champions don't get many skills anyway. But you will want to pick up those charisma-based skills. We certainly don't need to be good at recall knowledge, because that's what our ranger is for. For our cause, you probably saw which one we're taking coming, but we'll be taking obedience. So enemies either have to kneel before us, or take mental damage. But we do want to be unholy in this build. And there's a very specific reason for that, which we will get to later in this video. We want to use our Iron Command while in the darkness. There's a big reason for that. While them kneeling before us makes them prone and therefore off guard, the Witch's Darkness does indirectly make them off guard to the entire party. And them being prone won't double that up. But what it will do is make enemies waste an action getting back up, which is big. We'll also be taking some feats to take advantage of that, but it's always good to waste enemy actions. And of course, they'll be bumbling around in that darkness spell, whereas we can see through it just fine. Assuming they don't have dark vision at this point, or greater dark vision later. Our first feat for this build is going to be Defensive Advance. This is just the defensive version of Sudden Charge. Plain and simple. We get to stride and raise our shield. And we get to attack if the enemy is within melee reach at the end of our stride. We're going to be pretty slow, so having good action economy on that first turn is going to be pretty important, especially if enemies are in that darkness spell. And getting a stride plus 2 attacks is going to be important for keeping enemies in the darkness, especially since if we attack them, they're more than likely going to attack us back, which is what we want. For level 2, we'll be taking Iron Repercussions. That persistent mental damage that they get if they don't kneel for us from this feat is going to put a lot of pressure on them. So see, if we use Iron Command on an enemy, then they either have to kneel before us, which makes them off guard to everyone, or they have to get rid of that persistent damage somehow, as we just effectively put them on a timer. They have to get rid of that persistent damage by either making the check, attacking us, taking us down, or get out of the darkness. Because, like I said, that puts a huge amount of pressure on them because they're on a timer now. All these options are very good for us. So we definitely want to take this feat. Next up is the feat that we need to be unholy for, Aura of Despair. As long as enemies are in our champion's aura, they take a -1 penalty on saves against fear and can't reduce their frightened condition below 1. This is why we want to be good at intimidation, and this will help out our allies' fear effects, like our Witch's Fear spell or our Ranger's Threatening Mimicry. Next up is Reactive Strike. Should be pretty obvious why we're taking this. If enemies kneel before us, That means they're prone and have to stand back up. It means we get to hit them when they do so. Pretty simple. Next up is Expand Aura. Pretty simple here. Just for one action, we can make our champion's aura 30 feet instead of 15 feet. This lasts until the end of our next turn right now, but once we hit level 10, it'll be 1 minute, and at level 16, we can have it up all the time. So more enemies will take penalties on their saves against fear effects, and more enemies will always be frightened, as long as they're within our aura. This party is about fear, so we need that aura to be as big as possible. It does take an action to do this, but our goal is to make enemies frightened as much as possible in that darkness. Once we hit level 16, this is going to be a constant thing, so we won't have to use an action to expand our aura. And, a lot of times enemies are going to be within 15 feet of us. So we won't have to use this all the time. And our goal is to keep enemies in our darkness as much as possible and fear them. Next, we're going to be taking Smites. This does take an action on our part, but it gives us a bit extra damage, which we do need in this build. And this gives enemies an incentive not to attack our allies, but to attack us instead, which is what we want. As if the enemy decides to attack anybody in the party, including us, the duration of this increases. This will help us deal more damage to any enemy, but this will especially be helpful when we're facing enemies that aren't in the witch's darkness, as we need to get rid of those guys as quickly as possible. The last build in this party will do a ton of damage, but extra damage is always good. At level 12, we'll be taking Divine Wall. This makes all the squares adjacent to us difficult terrain, making it that much harder to get to our ranged attackers. We are a champion at the end of the day. One of our main jobs in this build is to protect that witch, because it's the witch that sets up the darkness spell, which is what this entire party is built around. But we do want to protect our other ranged allies as well, like our ranger when he's using his bow. And of course, we will be helping with the fear aspect of this party. Overall, just make sure you're doing both of those and you should be fine. Next is Divine Reflexes and Quick Shield Block, giving us 2 extra reactions. One we have to use for our shield block, and one we have to use for our on command. But both of those reactions are really good for this build, and we want to use them more often. Alright, at level 18, we'll be taking Swift Retribution. When we use our on command on an enemy, we are quickened on the next turn. We can use that action to either move closer to that enemy, or strike that enemy. In other words, we get an extra strike on that enemy pretty much no matter what. And that means we get extra damage pretty much, again, no matter what. And that means we either get an extra strike on a flat-footed enemy, which is awesome, or we get a chance to do extra damage on top of the mental damage they're already taking. For your capstone, it really depends on what you picked for Blessings of the Devoted at level 3. If you pick the weapon, go with Armament Paragon. If you pick the shield, go with Shield Paragon. If you pick Blessed Swiftness, go with Swift Paragon. It really doesn't matter which one you pick here. Of course, I would go with Blessed Swiftness, so you'd be picking Swift Paragon here. Mainly so that your allies don't trigger reactions when they move, if they're in your champion's aura. For free archetype, the first one that I recommend is the Blessed One archetype. Our cause doesn't say anything about not being able to heal people. It just says we have to do it for selfish reasons. Plus, the Blessed One archetype does have a lot of feats that will help make Lay on Hands better. And if you don't like some of the feats from this build, you can always take Mercy on the champion side of things. Next up, you can take the Bastion archetype as well, since we will be using a shield in this build. There are great feats for shields in the Bastion archetype, particularly the ones that let you use a shield and do something else. And finally, pretty much every Hell Knight archetype will work with this build, as that's another way you can get more defense with this build. And finally, let's talk Ancestries. The first Ancestry I recommend for this build is Dwarf. Dwarf has a ton of stuff that will help this build. Rock Runner will help with difficult terrain, and Boulder Roll will let you push enemies into the darkness. There's also Dwarven Reinforcement to help your shield, Mountain Stoutness for more HP, and even Defy the Darkness. Defy the Darkness gives us greater dark vision, and it only says that we can't use darkness ourselves. It says nothing about using the darkness to our advantage. Defy the Darkness only says we can't use anything with the darkness trait. No spells, no abilities, no items. But we can still take advantage of the Witch's Darkness spell. Which means if you go Dwarf with this build and you take this feat, you will always be able to see through darkness, regardless of what level the witch casts it at. For Heritage, I recommend the Rock Dwarf, as that will make it harder for enemies to push you out of the darkness. The second Ancestry I recommend for this build is Orc. More hit points, dark vision, and you'll be able to stay up more often. For Heritage, I recommend either the Battle Ready Orc, if you want free intimidation, or the Hold Scar Orc for more HP. And the last Ancestry that I recommend for this build is Hobgoblin. Has lots of healing options that can help you stay up. Also, Hobgoblin does have a few good intimidation options as well. For Heritage, I recommend the Warren-bred Hobgoblin. Warren-bred Hobgoblin will give you some options for seeing concealed and hidden creatures, which is also a big deal. And that's going to do it for this build. If you guys enjoyed this video, go ahead and leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more Pathfinder 2e teamwork content. You can also check out the other two builds in this party right here. Thank you guys so much for watching, and remember, teamwork is vital. It helps us solve problems.